America, once the clear leader in global trade, is being replaced. Partners who used to see the U.S. as their top choice are now turning to others, and it's not about emotion. It's because of unstable trade policies, rising costs, and a business environment that's becoming increasingly uncertain. Meanwhile, Canada has been quietly stepping up. It's leveraging its tax advantages, a highly skilled workforce, and, most importantly, its political and economic stability to win over deals that once went straight to the U.S. 11 countries have already started choosing Canada as their go-to trade partner instead of America. The last country on this list is a clear sign of a power shift in global trade that's quietly rewriting the world order. 1. Chile. Dawn breaks over California's Central Valley, where empty food processing plants cast long shadows across orchards. Meanwhile, Chile's grapes, berries, and citrus now bypass the U.S. market, flowing straight into Canada's distribution network. This shift began quietly in early 2025 when U.S. agricultural inspections turned into a weapon in trade disputes. Premium Chilean produce spoiled at American ports, caught in a tangle of paperwork. Canada, however, took the opposite approach, expanding port capacity and streamlining regulations. In just one quarter, Chile's fruit exports to Canada jumped 22%, while shipments to the U.S. dropped 15%. This shift is much deeper than just numbers. Walmart Canada now signs direct contracts with Chilean cooperatives, replacing American supermarket chains. Distribution hubs in Vancouver and Calgary handle shipments that once docked in Los Angeles and Houston. This move is prompting other nations to start mapping their own exits from the American market. 2. Jamaica. At the port of Kingston, the ships no longer set a course for Miami or Houston. Instead, they head for Halifax and Toronto, carrying rum, bananas, and tropical produce. The breaking point came when FDA inspections turned a 12-day voyage into a month-long ordeal. Shipments of rum racked up so many storage fees they wiped out any profit. Canada offered a solution, pre-clearance agreements that met quality standards while respecting business realities. In just 6 months, Jamaica restructured its entire North American export strategy around Canada. Toronto has now replaced Miami as the Caribbean's main transshipment hub. Jamaica's agricultural exports to the U.S. have fallen 18% while shipments to Canada have hit record highs. The Jamaican government now calls Canada its priority logistics hub in North America, a concept that was unthinkable just 5 years ago. Bavarian cheese blocks that used to be a staple in Manhattan now show up mainly on specialty shelves in Toronto. German machinery and industrial equipment, once the backbone of major U.S. infrastructure projects, are now shipped straight to Canadian work sites. The reason isn't tariffs or a trade war. It's how the U.S. treats its partners. When American customs officers began treating German food products like contraband, demanding excessive paperwork and performing unreasonable inspections, Germany didn't hesitate. Why tolerate needless friction when Canada is ready to be a true partner? The shift was swift. Exports of German processed foods to Canada jumped 28%. But food was only the opening act. German auto parts and industrial equipment are now being rerouted, docking in Canadian ports instead of U.S. harbors. For German businesses, Canada is not only the safer choice, it delivers better service with far less political risk. 60746. 4. South Korea. Samsung electronics once destined for U.S. warehouses are now being unboxed for store displays in Canada. Korean instant noodles, once a comfort food for American college students, are now stacked high in Canadian warehouses while U.S. shelves sit empty. The reason wasn't competition, it was contempt. New U.S. packaging and labeling rules turned Korean food into a foreign object that required exhaustive inspection, even though it had been safely consumed for decades. Millions of dollars worth of goods were held up at American ports over paperwork disputes. Within 5 months, $150 million worth of food exports were rerouted straight to Canada. Costco Canada signed exclusive distribution deals with Korean producers, and for the first time, Metro Vancouver reported Korean products outselling their American counterparts. This shift goes far beyond food, as South Korea's tech industry now treats Canada as its primary North American logistics hub. 22222222306.
5. Brazil. Refrigerated containers that once unloaded Brazilian beef in Houston now dock in Halifax. Shipments of raw sugar that once fed America's food industry are now fueling Canada's refineries. The decision wasn't emotional, it was pure math. When the U.S. slapped a border carbon tax of up to 18% on Brazilian agricultural goods, Brazil simply changed course. Brazil now supplies 20% of Canada's processed meat market, while U.S. importers struggle to find replacements. And it's not just food. Brazilian ethanol is now part of Canada's fuel blending program, cutting costs for Canadian refiners. This relationship is further cemented by the Brazil-Canada Renewable Energy Fund, with investments that make U.S. cooperation economically pointless. When an agricultural superpower builds trade ties on environmental collaboration instead of political pressure, the shift tends to be permanent. 6. France. The champagne bottles once popping at American celebrations are now uncorked in Canada. French cheeses that used to grace U.S. wine bars now sit in Canadian specialty shops. This isn't just a trade story, it's a cut straight into America's cultural influence. When the U.S. slapped a 25% tariff on premium European foods, France swiftly redirected $22 billion in annual exports to Canada. Iconic brands like Veuve Clicquot completely restructured their North American distribution networks, making Vancouver and Montreal the new hubs. The damage isn't just in lost revenue. It's in the erosion of America's soft power, once reinforced by European culinary culture. When Paris calls Canada its priority gateway to North America, the message to Washington is clear: even the deepest cultural ties aren't immune to replacement. 7. Egypt. Once called the breadbasket of the world, Egypt is now at the center of a calculated reversal. The grain silos of Alexandria, which used to overflow with American wheat, are now filled with Canadian harvest. The world's largest wheat importer has officially declared itself free from dependence on U.S. agricultural supply. For Egypt, the math was simple but ruthless. U.S. wheat prices spiked, driven by climate volatility and political maneuvering, while Canada's supply stayed steady. In 2025 alone, Egyptian trade officials restructured 60% of their wheat contracts, shifting entirely to producers in Saskatchewan. This shift not only cements Canada's reputation as a dependable supplier, it also lays bare how the U.S. has turned agriculture into a political weapon. Other nations are now looking at Egypt and plotting their own path to break free from dependence on U.S. agriculture. 8. Mexico. Then comes Mexico, the NAFTA nightmare. Truckloads of avocados that once crossed into Texas now head north to Canadian border checkpoints. Tequila, the soul of countless American bars, now sits neatly on Canadian liquor store shelves. It's nothing short of a knife in the back of the very idea of North American integration. Mexican fruit exports to Canada have surged 30%, while U.S. buyers wrestle with political uncertainty and inspection delays. But the deepest wound is symbolic. Mexico isn't just diversifying, it's hedging against America's instability. The new NAFTA Plus pact between Mexico and Canada prioritizes duty-free food trade and explicitly leaves out the United States. The very trade infrastructure designed to bind the continent together is now the escape hatch Mexico uses to break free from Washington's grip. 9. India. India, the homeland of spices, has just found a new destination. Turmeric, cumin, and cardamom that once brought fragrance to American kitchens now infuse Canadian homes instead. In Washington's eyes, the U.S. food safety inspection process treated Indian agricultural goods as if they were contamination risks. India's response was swift and decisive. It redirected the bulk of its spice, lentil, and rice exports to Canada, a market with quick clearance and clear regulations. Corporate giants like Tata established permanent warehousing hubs in Brampton and Surrey, creating infrastructure that makes any return to the U.S. market nearly impossible. When the world's largest democracy chooses Canada over the U.S., it is not merely a business deal. It is a statement. 10. United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is making a different kind of Brexit, but this time, it's away from America. Shortbread biscuits that once graced American afternoon teas now appear only in specialty stores across Canada. This is not simply a trade disruption, it is a severing of cultural DNA. The special relationship between Britain and America was once thought to transcend any political turbulence. But inconsistent regulations have driven British exporters toward Canada. In just 1 year, British food exports to Canada rose by 21%, while shipments to the U.S. were held back by compliance checks that felt more like suspicion toward a trusted ally. When your closest cultural ally chooses Canada for practical reasons, it strips bare the emptiness of special declarations that cannot withstand administrative reality. 11. Japan. But the biggest shock of all comes from Japan. The ultimate betrayal. Miso, soy sauce, and matcha ingredients that once defined Japanese cuisine in U.S. cities now appear exclusively on Canadian supermarket shelves. The world's third-largest economy has declared independence from U.S. food trade agreements, and the seismic shift is reshaping economic relations across the Pacific. This isn't a slow withdrawal, it's a surgical redirection. It all began when U.S. Customs targeted Asian food imports with prolonged inspections. Japan made its choice, dignity over market share. In just 6 months, $3.2 billion in Japanese food exports were redirected to Canada. Sushi-grade tuna now lands in Vancouver instead of Los Angeles. In new policy documents, Japan has officially designated Canada, not the U.S., as its top food trade partner in North America. This is not a market adjustment, it is a geopolitical restructuring.